In this episode, we'll take a look at the Vocaster USB audio interfaces from Focusrite. Let me go ahead and give you my take or my summary at the start here. I think the Vocaster is unique from a lot of other USB audio interfaces in some really important ways that make it a really good option for certain people that are doing podcasting, live streaming, and other sorts of things like that. It's really made for spoken word audio, but you can also bring in audio from a variety of sources. It has a 3.5 millimeter input. It has a Bluetooth connectivity option that allows you to bring in audio from a phone or a mobile device. And these are really unique for USB audio interfaces. Most USB audio interfaces have XLR inputs, maybe some line inputs, but none of those other things. Now, there are a few exceptions. I think some of the podcast recorders nowadays can do that, but this is primarily an audio interface with some of those additional features and at a $300 price point for the 2-input version and $199, $200 for the 1-input version. So it also has a very good app that you can use to mix all of those input sources and really pretty good routability. You can actually send audio back from your computer into the overall mix that you're recording, which is really nice too. So if you are, again, producing a podcast or a live stream, mixing everything together is all done pretty much within this one app, and it makes it really easy to work with. It also has some other nice features. Mute buttons that work. They work well. When you press the mute button, and it doesn't make clicks or pops that are really annoying. So a mute button for each of the inputs on the Vocaster 2 and then a mute button on the Vocaster 1. It also has a power button. I know that sounds crazy, but there are so many audio interfaces in this price range certainly that do not have power buttons. For newbies that don't know much about audio production, there are some enhance modes that might work well for you. If you want to really, I think a lot of people that are first doing their podcast want to sound like they're on the radio. You have some presets that can help you get there pretty easily. The downside is it's not for everyone. For those that are a little bit more experienced in audio production, they might find some of those features a little bit limiting. They may not like the fact, for example, I'm not a huge fan of the fact that you have these enhance modes, the radio and the clean and so on and so forth, but you can't adjust any of the settings for those. You just get what you get. It's either on or it's off, period. That's all you get. It would be nice if you could adjust some of the parameters, and that's where you'd have to move up to something more like a PodTrack P8 or perhaps a Rodecaster Pro. So is this audio interface for everybody? No, but there are a lot of people out there who want to produce a podcast or a live stream, and I think this could be a really, really good option for those people. Now, for those of you that want to dig into the nerdy details, let's jump in. I'm going to go through these as quickly as I can. First up, this unit on the XLR inputs for the microphones they have a gain range of 70 dB. I don't know exactly where it starts and where it ends, but that gain range allows you to run microphones like a SHURE SM7B directly into the unit without using a cloud lifter or a FET head or any other kind of microphone activator, whatever you want to call those things, inline preamplifiers. You don't need that. The Vocaster can do that on its own. We are making a recording here. This will be our practical noise floor sample. I'm recording in my typical space at a table with a sound blanket on top of it, with sound blankets on 3 sides of me and a blanket on the floor behind me. You record at up to 24-bit, 48 kilohertz sample rate. It does on the Vocaster 2 have 2 XLR microphone inputs, and on the Vocaster 1, it has 1 microphone input. You can turn on phantom power plus 48 volts for each input independently of each other. The practical noise floor, when you plug in a SHURE SM7B, for example, and you record some dialogue in a quiet room, we got a practical noise floor that sat at minus 66.67 dB RMS max. And that's when you apply a 70 hertz high-pass filter. That microphone has so much bass in it that it has this massive low-frequency kind of bubble at the bottom. If you apply that high-pass filter, it comes through pretty clean at minus 66.67 dB RMS max. That's good. When I plug in a dummy XLR connector to measure the self-noise that's generated by the inputs themselves, I plug in a WXLR plug that has a 150 ohm resistor across pins 2 and 3. The reason we do that, the reason we plug that in, is it simulates the load of a dynamic microphone. And then we turn the gain on the input all the way up on the Vocaster 2 here, made a recording of that silence. And what we came out with was the audio sitting at minus 70.45 dB RMS max. That is an excellent finding. So the preamps are pretty clean, quite clean. If you're having any hiss issues, it's probably your microphone. So that's the good news with the Vocaster. It's not going to be the thing that's contributing all that self-noise. As I mentioned, it does have a 3.5mm TRRS input jack that allows you to plug in your mobile devices and bring that audio directly into the Vocaster with a wire, if you want to do that. Now, if you want to do it wirelessly, you can do that as well with a Bluetooth connection. Bluetooth connectivity is pretty easy to set up. I didn't have any problems with it. Here's a sample of both of those. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you're quite sure of the fact. It was easier to know it than to explain why I know it. If you were asked to prove that 2 and 2 made 4, you might find some difficulty, and yet you are quite sure of the fact. All right, welcome to our podcast today. It's really good to have you here, Emma.
Yeah, ditto.
Ditto.
We don't know what we're talking about on this podcast.
Actually, I do have a topic I think could be useful, and that is I'd like to understand all the different the numbering scheme for... On the Vocaster 2, there's a headphone output for each of the inputs. So there's one for the host, one for the guest. On the Vocaster 1, of course, there's a single headphone output. And these are pretty good. They are easily able to drive 250 ohm headphones. And I found overall the quality of the headphone amplifier is pretty good. Is there a little bit of hiss, a tiny bit, when you push it to some of the higher volume settings? But overall, I think it's very, very good. No latency, so you're definitely, at least from what I can hear, no discernible latency. So for those that would be concerned about something like that, it sounds like it's a direct monitoring output. If you want to use this as your standard USB audio interface for your computer and connect self-powered monitors to this, near-field monitors or speakers, it has 2 line-level outputs for that as well, which is nice. And a very unique feature, it has a 3.5mm unbalanced TRS, that is a stereo output for cameras. So if you're doing a video podcast or a video live stream is kind of redundant, but if you are doing that, you can send the audio directly from the Vocaster into your camera, which is not a feature you see on most audio interfaces, regardless of price. For those that might be concerned about latency, we connected our Vocaster 2 to our Mac Studio, and we opened up Logic. And what we found is that if we set it to a buffer setting of 128 samples, for output, we found a latency of 5.7 milliseconds, and for a round trip latency, 11.6 milliseconds, which is really pretty good. For those that are not as familiar with how to set up your gain or your input level, it does have an auto gain feature, so you press a button, hold it for a few seconds, it has you talk for 10 seconds, and while you're talking at that normal level, it'll go ahead and adjust the input level for you, so you don't have to worry about that. And what it does, it looks like it just sort of targets an overall level of about minus 18 dB. As I mentioned before, there is a mute button, and the mute that you can actually mess up the implementation of a mute button pretty easily. But this one seems pretty clean. I'm going to go ahead and mute it and kind of talk, and then as I'm talking, unmute it again. What we're listening for is clicks and pops and things like that. So here we go, and I'm going to go ahead and mute it, and now I unmute it again, and I'm going to go ahead and going to unmute again. Seems pretty clean, and so that's a super useful feature as well. Now, there are 4 onboard enhance modes, and this is where you need the Vocaster Hub app. Right now I'm recording into my MacBook here, and let me go ahead and run through these different enhance settings. This is the clean setting. I just switched over to the clean setting. This is probably, this is a bit much, but you can clip. I'm going to go ahead and need to pull the gain down just a little bit here. This is the clean setting. Let's go ahead and switch over to the warm setting. This is the warm setting. I think what these are doing is they're applying some equalization, kind of sculpting the sound a little bit, plus they're applying some compression. So this is the warm setting. And then we'll go to the bright setting. This is the bright setting. Not for people with a lot of sibilance, especially using microphones that are a little bit more sensitive. This is a condenser microphone. and it's a little too much with my voice. The sizzling of the S's and C's is just grating. I apologize for that, but I needed you to hear what it sounds like, and you're hearing lots of mouth noise as well. And then finally, here's the radio setting. I think a lot of newbies are going to love this setting. I feel like personally it's a little too much for my taste, but this is the radio setting if you want that FM radio announcer sound for your podcast. So be really careful with those people. If you are new with audio, just be careful. If something might sound really cool, like an FM radio announcer voice at first, but keep in mind that can be really fatiguing for your audience to listen to. I think what you're best off doing is getting your microphone close, recording in a quiet space where there's not a lot of reverberation in the room, that is sound bouncing off the walls. A lot of times lay people will refer to that as echo. It's technically reverb, but those settings are there if you need them. And so thank you for that, Focusrite. You also have the ability to do what's called Loopback. So you can play back music or sound or intros or outros from your computer into the overall Vocaster mix. So if you're live streaming, you can bring that into the mix with the Vocaster Hub app here by playing music or any of that audio back from your computer. Really nice feature there as well. This may seem silly, but there is a power button. Most sub $1,000 audio interfaces don't have a power button, so thanks for that. In terms of RF immunity, that is to say, does it pick up interference from radio frequency types of devices, phones, wireless transmitters, and things of that nature? We used a 500 megahertz wireless microphone transmitter, put it right nearby the Vocaster. Also a phone using LTE, Wi-Fi, so on and so forth, and we didn't pick up any sort of digital noise or any sort of interference. So it seems like it's shielded pretty decently, so good there. Now, the physical build is all plastic, but it has pretty decent fit and finish, and it seems like it will hold up pretty nicely. The knobs seem pretty sturdy. They don't have a lot of wobble or wiggle to them. So the buttons are pretty nice too in terms of their feel. They have a tactile feel. You press them. They look at first like membrane buttons, but when you push them, they have a pretty satisfying click to them. The main knob here allows, it turns nicely. Just overall pretty decent build quality, but it is plastic. The Vocaster Hub is nice. It allows you to control everything. So you have the more advanced settings on here. So for example, if you want to change your enhance mode, you can do that here. It also is essentially a mixer. You have this whole section at the bottom here where you can define what gets played back in the overall show mix. This is what gets sent to your computer. But actually, it's a multi-track interface. So it sends all of these individually, plus it sends the mix. So if you're recording to your digital audio workstation and you just want to bring in the host microphone, you can do that. If you want to bring in the host microphone plus something else, you can do that individually. Or if you just want to mix, you can just pull in the mix. So your digital audio workstation allows you to do that as well. The Vocaster comes bundled with a bunch of different software apps. I think probably the most interesting one to me is Hindenburg. It comes with the free version of Hindenburg Lite and also a trial version of Hindenburg Pro, which is a digital audio workstation primarily for reporting and podcasting. And then finally, the Vocaster comes with a 3-year warranty from Focusrite. Now, no product is perfect. What are the cons? From my point of view, a few things. Number one, these are nitpicky. None of them are deal breakers for the market to which this product is aimed. But the first one is the included USB cable is USB-A to USB-C. It's 1 meter long, which is kind of short. And maybe in the PC world, there are still laptops with USB-A inputs on them, but not Apple hasn't released a MacBook with USB-A ports on it for at least 6 or 7 years. So it's a little bit of an odd choice. I don't understand why it wasn't a USB-C to USB-C cable, but the output port on the Vocaster is USB-C. And you're either going to need to use a different cable if you only have USB-C inputs or use an adapter. An issue I have with a lot of interfaces that are made for beginners is that they don't have any sort of indicator on the meters as to what your levels are. So you get a green line that turns yellow, that turns red when it clips. You do have a clip indicator on the unit itself and in the app. Thank you for that. But I would love to have markings that say this is minus 6 dB or this is minus 12 dB. I like that people are trying to make things simple, but in some ways that makes things harder for people who have a little bit more experience. So Focusrite would be lovely if you could add some markers, at least in the Vocaster Hub app. Now, those presets we talked about earlier, for me, generally useless. Not that they're useless for everybody. I think they're a little bit heavy-handed to some extent, but what would be nice is if you could control them a little bit, adjust them just a little bit, even if it's just a simple like heavy or light setting, like strong or not so strong setting. Something where you could dial it back a little bit would be really, really nice. Maybe that's something that Focusrite can add. I don't know, but would be a nice addition. Now, one last thing. The plastic, while it seems like it's reasonably durable, it is a fingerprint gathering device. It just looks gross after a while. I don't know what is up with that. It's not a huge con. We can live with it. Just keep it clean. Don't eat French fries. And then operate your Vocaster like my friend Bandrew over on Podcastage channel here on YouTube said. He said it looked like he'd eaten French fries and then operated his audio interface. I concur that it's like my hands are clean and there are fingerprints all over this thing. Now, this comes in at $300 US for the Vocaster 2. That's the 2 XLR input version, and $200 US for the 1 input version. Overall, I think this is a really good buy and a nice choice for people who are needing a simple tool. And notice I said that very carefully. I didn't want to say it's for beginners because it is for beginners, but I actually find value in this too. And I don't know that I'm a beginner necessarily. So I am not a huge fan of the effects. They're just a little too heavy-handed, but nevertheless, I think the fact that there are things like a 3.5 millimeter unbalanced output for cameras is an amazing feature. There are so few audio interfaces that have that feature. Thank you, Focusrite, for thinking of that. The fact that you have a 3.5 millimeter input for phones and other mobile devices, again, really thoughtful design there. And it's like not super innovative, but it's just enough that nobody else is doing it that it makes it really useful. So overall, I think it can be a really useful tool for those that are live streaming or podcasting. Hope that was helpful for you. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave those down below. And if you've not already subscribed, make sure you do that. And we'll be sure to get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk to you soon.